Well, who steps up because of the campaign of 1876 and preparations that have to be made for it? Who steps up and talks President Grant, who frankly doesn't like Custer much, never did, into reinstatement? Okay, General Philip Sheridan comes to his aid, and Grant reinstates him. And so he served 11 of the 12 months on suspension without pay, but he will be back. And that takes us to our next subtopic, which is Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer back in command. Now, I told you Lieutenant Colonel Armstrong. What was he before? Captain. Well, what happened is, after the Civil War, Custer's position in the United States Army was eliminated. Okay? And so, when he was reinstated, he accepted an appointment as Lieutenant Colonel. Okay? Which wasn't really what he wanted, because he went from what? General to Captain to Lieutenant Colonel. But he accepted it because it got him back in. But he thought he needed an important military victory prior to the campaign of 1876 against the hostiles to kind of prove his worth. So he accepts this appointment as a lieutenant colonel. He has it in his mind that he needs an important military victory to establish himself again. And he's going to get this, hey, look it, he's going to get this victory, okay? He's going to get this victory on November 22nd, 1868. He's going to get this victory on November 22nd, 1868. And what he did on November 22nd, 1868, him and his command engaged, hey, look at this, hostile Indians at Washita, Oklahoma. And Washita's on your ID sheet. So on November 22nd, 1868, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his regiment engaged, quote, hostile Indians at Washita, Oklahoma. Now basically, there was a village at Washita under the command, so to speak, of Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle. Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle was the commander, so to speak, in military terms, of this Cheyenne village at Washita. And there were quite a few warriors there, but there were a lot of what else there? Women and children. Innocent women and children were in the village. They really weren't causing a whole lot of trouble, to be quite frank with you. But Custer needs this victory to establish himself. So he attacks this village of Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle, and as he storms the village, he's yelling to his men, "We caught him napping, boys!" And he charges the village. "We caught him napping, boys," and charges the village. So Custer attacks the village of Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle. He storms the village with his troops, proclaiming to his men, "We caught him napping, boys." Well, they just overran and slaughtered the village. They killed a lot of warriors, but they killed a lot of innocent women and children as well. So there was not much defense. They did catch them napping, so to speak, but they didn't expect to be attacked by the military like that. They really weren't being a huge problem, although where they were trying to get them to go. Where were they trying to get all these Indians to go, and they weren't really going to the west of the reservations. And so he just slaughtered the whole village, okay? Well, he also killed 800 Indian ponies, just slaughtered them. Slaughtered 800 Indian ponies, and then just stole, basically, or took, or captured 800 more. So Custer goes in and storms the village, wipes them out, kills many Indian warriors, but also kills many innocent women and children. They slaughter 800 Indian ponies and steal or take, capture another 800.
Did everybody die?
No, good question. Now, they hit a pretty sparse village. There were a lot of Cheyenne warriors along the Washita River, which was where this village was. And Custer knows it's going to be tough to escape all of those warriors in the area with his command intact. Okay, so he goes in and storms the village, but he hasn't met nearly all the Cheyenne warriors that are in the area. And they're along the Washita River, and he's got a little bit of a problem. He's got to figure out how he's going to get out of there, okay? Well, what he did and this is answering Brooks' question, which is a great question, is he took Indian women and children that survived hostage, knowing that the warriors cared enough about their women and children that they would not risk their lives by pursuing Custer out of that area. So they took women and children hostage. Now this is an interesting concept, okay? Because this is a philosophy. Nobody knows what happened at the Battle of Little Bighorn, right? From the white perspective. And there's some speculation that Custer had this same philosophy when he charged the village, or the village at Custer Battlefield at the Little Bighorn. One of the same philosophies to get them to go to the reservation. He was going to capture and keep their women and children hostage. That's just a thought. We'll get back to that later. So he had done it before, okay? Well, what General Custer did is he marched, or not General, Lieutenant Colonel Custer marched out of the Washita Valley with the women and children in front of the command so they would not be fired upon. So they took these women and children and marched them out in front of the command. And these warriors didn't want to harm their women and children, so they didn't attack Custer. His regiment was saved from sure death and annihilation. As I'm telling you, if he wouldn't have come up with that strategy, they would have been killed to a man by the other Cheyenne warriors that were in the area. So he took women and children hostage, marched them out in front of him, and they let him go. Now, Custer made a decision that wasn't that good, that's going to maybe hurt him in the Battle of Little Bighorn, so bear with me. During the original battle, a major under his command by the name of Joel Elliott took 18 men and ran after a group of Cheyennes that were fleeing the village. So during the battle, Major Joel Elliott took 18 men and he rode after a group of Cheyenne Indians that had fled the fighting. In other words, they didn't want to fight in the valley. They knew they were overrun, so they took off. And Major Joel Elliott and 18 soldiers followed them, went in pursuit of them. Okay? Well, by the time the battle had been over, and Custer was ready to depart with those hostages to get out of the valley, who had not returned yet? Elliott or his men. Well, Custer wasn't waiting around. And kind of the rule is you never leave a fallen man behind. You just don't do that. Well, Custer wasn't going to risk what was going to happen to him. So despite objection from some of his other officers, he chose to leave those men behind. So Custer leaves. He has the women and children in front of him. He's getting out of the Washita Valley. He has left Elliott and his command behind. Well, several hours went by, still no sign of Elliott. So Custer at that point sent out a search party and found nothing. Okay, so Custer marches out of there. He chooses to leave Elliott and his soldiers behind. He gets several hours out, away from the Washita Valley, sends back a search party. They find nothing. Well, finally, later, Elliott and his men were found. They were about 2 miles from the original battle site. They are all dead. They were all frozen. November 22nd, right? They were badly mutilated. They all lie in a circle, and their heads were either battered in or their heads were chopped completely off. Okay? So Elliott's command were found 2 miles from the battle scene. They were all dead. They were all frozen. They were all badly mutilated. They were lying in a circle, which tells you that they were trying to protect themselves from a horrific end. Their heads were either battered in or completely chopped off. And many of the soldiers, you know what this is right here in a man? What's that called? Some of that bigger ones. Adam's apple. Many of the men had their Adam's apples cut out of their necks, and their hands and feet were severed off. I mean, this was an ugly scene. Okay? So I'll repeat some of that gruesome again. Okay? They're frozen, they're badly mutilated, they're lying in a circle, their heads are either battered in or cut off. Many of the soldiers had their Adam's apples cut out of their necks, along with their hands and feet severed. Well, when that was found out by Custer's command, you can imagine it caused a little bit of an ugly mood among the group. Because they were friends of these guys, right? And Custer did not go back immediately to try to find them. Now, one man, and this is going to take a long history, one man that was especially upset with Custer's actions concerning Elliott and his men was Captain Frederick Benteen. Captain Frederick Benteen was very, very upset at Custer and outwardly challenged him about his decision not to go after those men. Very, very upset. Frederick Benteen was a captain under Custer's command. Okay? Kind of weird, you have commanders that have less of a rank than the people above them. That's kind of how messed up our ranking was at the time. But Custer had made a big-time enemy in Benteen. Like I mentioned, Captain Benteen openly criticized Custer, which is something you really didn't do at that time to a superior officer. He was mad because he left him. He thought it was a dereliction of duty for Custer to leave those men behind. He was very, very upset. He was so upset, he even leaked a story to the press about Custer, criticizing him and stating in the press that it was also a dereliction of duty. So he leaked this information to the press. So there came out a story. Did they cite Benteen in the story probably? No, he leaked it out. Okay, that means you don't want anybody to know where it came from. And he leaked that out to the press, and Custer got some really bad press there, which Custer was not very thrilled about, as you can imagine, because he was the what? Darling of the northern press. So that was a negative story. Well, Custer, as you can imagine, was just furious with Benteen because he found out about the leak. Okay? And the relationship between the two, negatively, is going to continue right up to and through the Little Bighorn. And you'll understand this when we get to it. Because Benteen's going with Custer to the Little Bighorn, and you're going to feel this tension the entire time. Okay? Really started right here. Okay, let's take us to a very important subtopic then, which is preparations for the campaign of 1876. Preparations for the campaign of 1876. And what's the goal of this campaign again, Keller? What are they going to do in this campaign in the military? You don't know? Blaine, you know? Well, I didn't talk about it yesterday. Mason, how about you? Why? What were they having a campaign for? What was the goal? What are they going to do? It was a military philosophy. Right, but they were going to initiate that military philosophy. They were going to try to contain them by putting them where? And if they wouldn't go peacefully, they were going to exterminate them, fight them. So that was the whole reason of the campaign of 1876, was to put these Indians on the reservation. The campaign wasn't set up, contrary to popular belief, to kill a bunch of Indians, but they were going to kill them and force them to the reservation. That was the goal. Either go to the reservation or you will be dealt with. Okay, just so you know that. Well, hello, Hannah, my dear.
Hello.
Well, there were a lot of conflicts before 1876, as you can imagine. And probably the most serious conflict occurred in the summer of 1874. So these Indian problems, how you doing? These Indian problems didn't stop. They continued and continued and continued, and one in particular happened in the summer of 1874. Now, some of these Indians claimed land. I don't know if it was reservation land, or at least they claimed an area. And one Sioux land was the Black Hills. That was considered Sioux land, the Black Hills. And I think you know where those are in South Dakota, Mount Rushmore, and the whole bit. Well, guess what happened in Sioux land in the Black Hills? I mean, we had these guys contained, right? Were they in one area where we could keep track of them? So that was pretty good. Except what happened in the Black Hills in the summer of 74? Found gold. And after gold had been discovered on Sioux land in the Black Hills, Custer commanded a military expedition to present-day South Dakota, because he was told by President Grant to go check it out. Go check out and see if this is true, that there's all this gold in the Black Hills. Okay? So, after gold had been, quote, discovered in the Black Hills, Custer was sent to Sioux land with an expedition to see if it was true. Okay? So Custer arrives, and he tells reporters that had accompanied him, because he always got the press with him, that got sent back to Washington, that, quote, gold was so plentiful you could pick it up off the ground. You didn't even have to dig for it or pan for it. It was so plentiful, according to Custer, that you could pick it up off the ground. So who now is interested in the Black Hills? Well, not everybody, but especially one person. Grant. Why? Because how are we doing financially after the Civil War? Bad. He needed that gold to replenish the federal treasury. So he tries to do the right thing. Initially, he tries to purchase the Black Hills from the Sioux. So Grant sends Custer out, he comes back and says, yeah, you can bet your life on it, there's a lot of gold in the Black Hills. Grant's going, man, we've really suffering financially after the Civil War. Be nice to have that land, get that gold, replenish our treasury. So he initially tries to buy the land from the Sioux. Well, it reminds me of Gene Ashenhurst, a friend of mine, many years ago, who's since passed. He had this beautiful ranch outside of Colstrip, Montana. Just beautiful. Been in the family for 100 years. Coal comes into Colstrip. Before it was Colstrip, they find all this coal. Guess where a lot of it is? On Gene Ashenhurst's ranch. And so they want to buy it. Okay? And Gene's thinking, God, you know, my family's been on this land for 100 years. So they make him an offer which he thought was very reasonable. And what did he say? No. And they think about it a little bit, and they come back, and I say, Gene, how's it going on? He goes, well, they made me an offer, I just couldn't take it. Oh, good. Well, it's probably good. So I saw him a few weeks later, because my dad worked on a ranch nearby. My dad says to him, how's it going, Gene, on that? He goes, well, they really upped their offer, but, you know, I just can't sell this land. I mean, this land is meaning something. Okay. Well, pretty soon it comes out in the paper that Gene Ashenhurst has sold his ranch to a coal company in Colstrip. And my dad, on his rounds, meets up with Gene. He goes, Gene, what's the deal? He goes, there's a certain price you just can't turn down. So they offered him so much money that he couldn't turn it down. He just couldn't do it. He says, this will set up my children, their children, their children, their children for years. They gave him an amazing amount of money. And you know they gave it to him with the idea they're going to make 3 times that much on the coal. So, but he sold it. The Sioux Indians were a little bit different. Who's going to speak for the Sioux Indians on this possible sale? No, not quite high enough. Sitting Bull, okay? And Sitting Bull put such a high price on this land that the government couldn't afford it, okay? Couldn't afford it. Now, if they'd have paid the price he asked, we'd have a whole different story in history now, probably. But Sitting Bull put such a high price on the Black Hills that the United States couldn't afford it. Well, typical government, and I just feel bad about this. Since their offer to purchase the Black Hills was rejected, what was the next step? Well, let's take the damn thing, okay? So the United States Army was ordered to take the Black Hills by force. I mean, how bad is that when you think about it, okay? But that's how it was. So since their offer to purchase the Black Hills was rejected, the government gave orders to the United States Army to take the sacred land from the Sioux by force. That is part of the campaign of 1876 to a point, okay? So, by 1876, 2 people sat in Grant's office and convinced him, we've had enough of this Indian problem. For Christ's sake, this is just getting ridiculous. You know, we have telegraphs and railroads, and they're sending up smoke signals. I mean, this isn't working. These people aren't adjusting to the new way of American life. And we got to put this thing to end. I mean, we just have to make military preparations to solve this thing forever. Who was sitting at the table with Grant talking him into that? It wasn't Custer. He doesn't like him. So who's sitting there? Who does he trust the most?
Benton.
No, God. Sherman and Sheridan. Absolutely. William Sherman, very good kids. William Sherman and Philip Sheridan are sitting with the president, President Grant, and they're convinced him that we got to take care of this Indian problem once and for all. And so they began to make military preparations to solve the Indian problem. Now, you can't just go in and take somebody's stuff without fair warning, really, and even we couldn't do that. So, if I say to you, you know, if you guys misbehave on this trip to Little Bighorn, I'm not going to take you to D.C., what am I giving you? An ultimatum. Okay, very good. That's what the government gave the Native Americans in the West. They gave them an ultimatum to the Plains Indians. All Indians on the Plains, which would not just include who? The Sioux, were given an ultimatum by the federal government. I'll tell you what that ultimatum was. Okay? So, we're going to by God, we can't buy it from you, we're going to take it from you. Okay? And here's your ultimatum. What you're doing is you're trying to give yourself, no pun intended, ammunition to do whatever you damn well please. Right? So here's the ultimatum. Important you know this. The Plains Indians were to return to reservations. The Plains Indians were to return to reservations by January 31st, 1876. The Plains Indians were to return to reservations by January 31st, 1876. If they did not return to reservations by January 31st, 1876, here's the ultimatum, they would be declared hostile by the federal government. So here's the ultimatum. Plains Indians were to return to the reservations by January 31st, 1876, or they would be declared hostile by the federal government. Now, if you're hostile, what are they going to do with you? They're going to move you by force or kill you, one of the two, or both maybe. Okay? Now, the Plains Indians didn't even respond to this ultimatum. And historians give two reasons why. Okay? They didn't even respond. And historians will give you two reasons why they didn't respond to the ultimatum. Now, what time of the year was this that they got the ultimatum?
Winter.
Winter. So, historians say that the Indians were not going to move from their villages in the middle of the winter at that time of the year. So that might be one reason they didn't respond, is we're not getting, taken up and moving to the reservation in the middle of the winter. This isn't our pattern. We move with the buffalo. We move 3 or 4 times a year, certainly not in the winter. We're hunkered down for the winter, just like everybody else. So that might be one reason. Probably not the real reason.